Hey guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter Likes Books. And today, I'm going to do the follow-up to my video that I did, books that I will never reread. And today, we're going to do books that I will definitely reread. So, it was interesting. I was standing in front of the bookshelf and I wanted to pick books that, I don't know, that like I thought some people might know some of them and then I could expose other books to other people because they hadn't heard of them before. Some of them are books that I've talked a lot about on my channel. Others are books that I've talked very rarely on my channel about. But all 5 of them are definitely videos that I will reread sometime in the near future. And one of them was sent to me not too long ago, and it's hands down one of my all-time favorite books. It profoundly impacted me when I read it. It really inspired me to be more of a writer, and it really just kind of, I don't know, through reading it, explained to me the art of writing and developing characters, and we'll get to this in just a second, which one it is. So anyway, the first book that I will definitely reread is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And is it possible that no one has ever read this book before? I feel like all paperbacks are so huge anymore. This paperback looks so small, doesn't it? I love this book. The interesting thing about this book is that at different times in my life that I've read it, I usually read it in the fall, first of all. I feel like it's a fall book that you have to read in like October, November. But every time I've read it, it has been like at a 5 or a 10-year span. The first time I read it, I think I was 16 in high school, maybe 18, something between 16 and 18. And I so related to Holden Caulfield at that time. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm Holden, you know? I think so many of us think that, right? Did you ever say if you had a son, you'd name him Holden? Join the crowd. Okay, so, but I so related to this book when I first read it. Not to mention, you know, like, back then, when I graduated from high school in 1990, it didn't have such a kind of like trite feeling to it as, and I said this in my last video, as it does now. Like it was kind of like people read it, but it was like people's parents had read it first and then they were passing it on to the kids. So it was kind of a second generation book. Now it's kind of like a third, fourth, fifth generation book, if you know what I mean. And so like if you're bohemian and artsy at all, you read this book. You know, it always ends up in like young adult contemporaries. It's like the angsty girl was reading Salinger, you know, like that kind of thing. But I don't think that lessens any more of it. You know, it's like when people say stuff about like Dave Matthews being like a college band, I'm like, he's still a fantastic musician. You know what I mean? So I feel the same way about Catcher in the Rye. The book makes me sad as I get older. It made me sad when I was younger, but I don't think in the same way. Now I look back on it as kind of like with this like, you know, this longing for youth that I didn't have when I read it at the time. You know, that when I first read it, I felt misunderstood. Now I look back and I have this kind of longing for that, if that makes sense. So, but I've always been attracted to books that have desperation in them. So Catcher in the Rye would definitely be my first choice. Okay. Now, the second book, I actually did a video talking about my greatest fears on my Peterisms channel, so go check out my Peterisms channel. It's a story time channel where I just tell stories of my life and things that I've learned. And I talked about how I read this book for Booktubeathon 2 years ago. And it was my very first Booktubeathon experience. I love Booktubeathon. And I read it because I did all books that had been made into movies. And I had never read this book before. I had read like 1 or 2 of his other books, but I had never read this one before. It terrified me. It's my greatest fear in my entire life, is sharks. And if you guys saw me do the review of this back in the day, let me just tell you, if you've seen the movie, you need to read the book. Because the book is, I mean, first of all, like, I hate this word, but like, what an iconic cover, right? I mean, do you see this? I mean, how could you, even if it didn't have a title on there, we would know what that was, wouldn't we? But the book has a romance in it that does not exist in the movie, and it's a pretty prominent romance in the book. Like, it's a really important part of the book. And it really describes a lot of the characterization of why characters act the way that they do. And it's interesting, if I had read the book and then seen the movie, I would have maybe understood a little bit, like, okay, I don't know how to explain this, but like, they don't act that way in the movie, but it's almost like the characters know the backstory, if that makes sense. Like when you're watching the movie, and then when you read the book, you're like, oh, that makes sense kind of now why they were a little bit like that. There's also kind of a mystery to this book that isn't, and it's not about sharks. It's, you know, about like the mafia and stuff like that. And that is in this book. That was no part of the movie whatsoever. But do you know the part about like the closing of the beaches and all that kind of stuff? Well, that plays a bigger part in the book. And it's very interesting to read it from that perspective and that point of view. So I would definitely recommend Jaws by Peter Benchley. I think I'm going to read it again this summer because it's a really great summer read. Just don't read it if you're going to the beach. And I can't believe I'm even doing this because I'm pre-filming this before I go to Miami. And yeah, so... Okay, the next book, and I was sent this, and I'm so excited because I gave away my copy a long time ago. It's by probably one of my top 3 favorite authors of life, and that is Stuart Onan, and it's The Speed Queen. And this book is so fantastic. I read it on a road trip going to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I can remember riding in the car, and I felt like her in this book, and which is crazy because if you read the book, it's so outlandish what happens. But let me read the back of it to you because I really think everybody should read this book. This is the book that taught me about characterization. It taught me about developing a story. It taught me about the importance of weaving stories and characters together and not just having a plot-based book or a character-based book, that you need both. And that's Stuart Onan's The Speed Queen. The Speed Queen is a gripping story of a twisted love triangle's drug-fueled killing spree across the desert plains, told in the voice of Oklahoma death row inmate Marjorie Stanford, who is recounting her experience for a best-selling horror writer researching the murders. Chilling, brutal, and unrelenting, it's an unput-downable crime novel in the tradition of James M. Cain, A Voyage into the Dark Soul of the American West. It is so fantastic. And Stuart Onan is probably one of my hands-down all-time favorite authors, and everything that he writes is so completely different that you never get the same thing twice, and I'm so excited to have this book again so I can read it. Okay, the next book I talked about on here not too long ago, and it's a memoir, and I love that. I'm like looking at it now, and I'm like, I just want to start reading it tonight, because I remember reading it the first time, and I just so connected to the story, and that is I'm Not Myself These Days by Josh Kilmer Purcell. And I do love the cover of it. I think the cover is so cool. You can see there's a goldfish. Where does it explain what it is? Because I wanted to read it to you guys. A very entertaining read, as tart and funny as Noel Coward play, for Kilmer Purcell is especially good at dialogue and as an... Okay, well, where does it talk about what it's about, though? Well, it's about when he was like a drag queen in New York City, and he's real involved in like drugs and alcohol, and it's just like this poignant memoir, and yeah, it's so, like, you will never forget this book if you read it. There are moments in it that are just fantastic. There are moments with his roommate. There's this one part where he's, like, on the train, and he, like, passes out in full drag, and he has these heels on that have a goldfish. And, I mean, this is a memoir. It's a true story. And it's, like, sometimes you're reading it, and you're like, did this really happen? Like, this is crazy, right? So, anyway, that would be my 4th one. And then my 5th pick of books that I definitely would reread. And I went up there and this was like, yeah, I was like right away, absolutely. In fact, I probably will read it soon. And that is Julie Murphy's Dumpling, Go Big or Go Home. And they are making this into a movie. Did y'all know that? Okay, it's coming out soon. And the sequel to Dumpling by Julie Murphy is coming out. And I'm so excited. And when I listened to this on Audible, and then my good friend Tanya bought it for me, and she bought it for me because she knew how much I loved it, and she wanted me to have a physical copy of it, because she's like, you loved that book so much, I want you to have a physical copy of it. And I do. I love this book so much, and it just makes me so happy. And, you know, it's beauty pageants and the South woven through with Dolly Parton lyrics and drag queens and hope and despair and first love and last kisses, and it's just one of the most fantastic books I've ever read in my entire life. You guys know I'm a huge Julie Murphy fan. I think that in the sequel that's coming out, it's like 2 kind of like secondary characters. It's about them, which I think is kind of genius. Like, we don't really often see that when, I don't know what this was, but we don't usually often see that when it comes to sequels, right? Like, they usually just write a sequel about the next thing. We don't see a sequel that has to do, you know, with secondary characters. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with all of that. So yeah, Dumpling, Go Big or Go Home by Julie Murphy. So these are the books that I would definitely reread. Catcher in the Rye, Jaws, I'm Not Myself These Days, Speed Queen, and Dumpling. And I would highly, highly suggest any of these books too if you haven't read any of them, and give them a try and let me know what you think. What are books that you guys would definitely reread? Let me know in the comment section below, and I will talk to you later. Bye.